Aloha, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Faith and Family First. I am your host, Eva Andrade, and I'm here with Marcus Oshiro, and we're going to be looking at some of the cases that are right now before the United States Supreme Court. And why does it look like, on the surface, that faith is under attack? Or is it? Is the Supreme Court helping or hurting us on the level of the U.S. Supreme Court? Let's chat about that. Marcus, welcome back.
I feel like I haven't left.
I know. Don't you feel like you just kind of slept over here?
Yeah.
All right. So today's show, what I want to do is I really want to launch into, I want to get out of the state of Hawaii for a little while.
Okay.
Because I think people are tired of us talking about the legislature.
Let's go spread our wings and go to Washington, D.C., where the United States Supreme Court is located.
Yes. And we want to remind everybody that Marcus is retired. He is no longer a practicing attorney. So anything he talks about today is in your own individual capacity, right?
That is correct. Using my First Amendment rights that all of us have as citizens of the state of Hawaii and the United States of America under our federal and state constitution.
Yes. So you are free, Marcus. You are set free.
I'm a free bird.
You are. And what does the Bible say? When you are set free, you are free,
free indeed. Amen.
That's right. So there shall be no holding back today. All right. So a lot of people don't realize, and maybe you can remind them of the process. Jim Hochberg in the past has reminded people about the process, but maybe the Supreme Court. So how often do they meet, and how does that work when cases reach the Supreme Court?
Okay, so they meet once a year, and they go into a session in fall, and they end up going through I'd say spring. And so spring this year would be June, end of June 2025. They hear miscellaneous types of cases from all different subject matters, fields of law, from the states, from the agencies, from the federal governments, you name it. It's a selective process that they themselves decide which cases they're going to hear. It's one of petition, and it's one of discretion for the Supreme Court to decide. And I believe they need to have at least 5 of the 9 justices who want to have a hearing on it, and then they'll have a hearing on it.
That's a great point, because not every case is accepted by the Supreme Court.
That's correct. In fact, I think it's like 1 out of 3,000 or 1 out of 5,000 is actually taken up and given oral argument and permission to submit briefs and to educate the court on the matter before it.
So what happens if they refuse the case? So as we talked about before, like how it gets the lower courts and it gets all the way up there.
Yeah, so the Supreme Court of the United States of America, Supreme Court called SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, is the final arbiter of the laws, the federal constitution and its application to state laws and state courts. And so it winds its way normally through state courts and or federal district courts. And there's an appeal. It goes to the next level, which is the appellate courts throughout the states. And then if it goes from there, it goes to the U.S. Supreme Court. And it's they call it a writ of certiorari. That's a writ of requesting permission to have the Supreme Court review the lower court or the appellate court's decision.
You know, what's really interesting is, Hawaii Family Forum's been around since 1998, and I cannot tell you the amicus briefs that we have signed on that have made it all the way up to the Supreme Court.
You mean friend of court briefs?
Yes.
Amicus. That's a fancy word. Friend of court briefs.
Yeah. And I love that because, a lot of times as the cases are working themselves up, what will happen is one of our state brothers and sisters, it'll affect them because it happens in their state or in their circuit, right? Because we're the Ninth Circuit, right? So everything that affects the Ninth Circuit. Do you know offhand what are the states that are in the Ninth Circuit?
No, I don't know. I have a visual image of it in my mind, but it's basically the West Coast. I think it goes into... Is it Idaho, Nevada,
kind
New
of like,
Mexico?
I can see that
picture.
picture.
And then you come around to California, Washington, Oregon. I don't know if it's Alaska. I don't know if Federated States of Micronesia.
Yeah. Well, see,
Yeah.
if somebody watching and listening right now has a lot of money and they want to pour it into the show, then maybe we can start paying our producer so that she can throw up stuff like that as we're talking about it. See, we can improve the show if people invest.
No, I should know that.
So,
Sorry. Yeah.
no, and that's great.
Yeah.
But okay, so things make it up to the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court refuses, then what happens is the decision that the lower court made that stays.
That's the decision of the law. That's the decision of the case, and that's the status of the case.
Right. So if people don't like what happens, that's why that they'll appeal to the Supreme Court, right?
Yeah, they'll appeal it. Both sometimes, it's usually the losing party would appeal it, but there's also the instance where you have different appellate circuits with different outcomes, and that's where the Supreme Court most times will look at a case. They say, well, the Southwest appellate court said this, the lower South did this, the Ninth Circuit did this. Let's try and reconcile and have some rhyme and reason and settle the law in this area for the entire country. We'll have a case. We'll take the case. And that's what we're talking about today.
Right. And so they have a lot of different cases. And we'll put the link below if you want to go check and see all of the cases that are before the United States Supreme Court right now. The ones we're talking, there are many, but we're going to talk about a few that are religious freedom, of course, because that's our bent, right? So the first case I just kind of want to mention, and Marcus, I only sent you a couple to talk about. So some of these you may know about, some you may not. So I'm just going to throw out a couple. So another one key case is Groff versus DeJoy. And this one is about a Christian postal worker. His name was Gerald Groff, and he was disciplined for refusing to work Sundays. And SCOTUS back, this was a couple years ago, so this is already, but it kind of ties into what we're talking about today. Yeah. So SCOTUS ruled, and SCOTUS, for those of you that don't know, that's the Supreme Court of the United States, right? SCOTUS ruled unanimously in his favor, strengthening workplace protections for religious observance, okay? So that came down. So how I want to frame this as we start moving into, are you familiar with that case?
Yeah, I think that's a postal worker, I believe, that they were he was trying to get a religious accommodation so that he could attend to, was he a Seventh-day Adventist or was he a Quaker?
Yeah, he had some kind of a prominent religious role.
Yeah, he had to go and attend service or, some kind of rite under his religion or his sect. And they needed to make that accommodation for him.
So what about Hawaii law? Do you see here in Hawaii, have you seen conflicting laws like this about people's faith and them practicing?
Fortunately, I have not heard much about that. In fact, I know that in the past, there have been some issues regarding some county workers and their religious rights to attend to religious services, observations. And there's been no resistance. There's always been accommodation. I think that's part and parcel of who we are in Hawaii.
Yeah. I think that we only really saw this surface during COVID.
Yeah.
There was a lot of people in COVID who felt like it, that the forced vaccinations and the forcing
but
of
that's why that was really an imposition of a federal standard that was advisory, not statutory, advisory, that was adopted wholesale by the administrations to impose it upon the local people.
But that is what caused, I believe that was part of the impetus that rose all of the angst that people feel right now towards forced vaccinations and all of that. Because once the government starts getting in there and telling people what they have to do with their body, people are upset.
Yeah, well, that's what I say. We did it to ourselves. It's a self-inflicted wound by government, primarily the federal government, to come out with these advisories that were taken as directives, were taken as, science and research-based, advisories or prescriptions. And it was wholesale adopted by the previous administrations and imposed upon people. It's like the 6-foot distance. Now we know, that was put out of the air by Dr. Fauci, right? This whole thing about taking a vaccine will prevent you and vaccinate you from getting the COVID-19 wasn't true. Oh, take the vaccine, then you will not spread it or share it with your loved ones. Again, we learned that wasn't true. So the reason why there's some hesitancy, you can understand the rationality of why people are hesitant to believe wholesale their government.
Right. Right. And I think that that's what's important and why we need to continue to have these conversations.
We do need to, and we have to restore this confidence in our government.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
on all
true.
levels, right?
That's true.
I mean,
and I just have to say this. So, so put your ex-legislator hat on for a second. You know, when you were in that Capitol building, did you see or hear or feel like there was some anti-religious bias toward people who were showing up at the Capitol to testify who wore the religious hat?
yes. You know, I got to say that when I was elected back in 1994, that's when Governor Cayetano went from Senator Cayetano to Governor Cayetano. You know, we're going through the whole, you know, local recession at that time. Okay. Yeah, I do sense that. It wasn't one of those things you can be loud and proud and proclaim that you identify with a certain series of alphabetical letters. Or any kind of faith publicly. Christian fundamentalists, Pentecostals, Catholics, Mormons were kind of looked at in an odd way or peculiar way, and in some instances not taken very seriously.
I know because I've been doing this for a long time. When I've testified at the Capitol, people know. All the legislators that know me, they know that I'm Catholic and that I represent Hawaii Family Forum, which is a faith-based organization. I personally have never felt that or been treated that way. However, I must admit that there is a difference with people that show up at the Capitol, you know, preaching. You know, and so when a bill comes up, they come up, right? And instead of testifying on the bill, they're telling legislators they're going to hell. They're quoting scriptures at them. And I want to be clear because I don't want to get all the hate email that I'm not saying that people should not bring their faith to the Capitol. They absolutely should bring their faith. But, you know, this is one of those teaching opportunities that there's a way to bring Jesus to the Capitol.
There's a way to bring your faith to how you walk, how you talk, how you conduct yourselves, that will reveal the sincerity of your religious belief system and the practices of that belief system.
Right. And I think that a lot of these cases, like even at the Supreme Court level, they stem from people who are just simply trying to bring their faith into the public arena, and they are attacked or stopped. Or
so if you want to talk about those cases, because I was just reviewing some of the oral arguments, and it's fascinating because you hear from the so-called liberal justices as well as the more conservative justices, but underlying throughout those colloquies going on with the justices is this sense of what is the law?
Right.
What is the law? What are the proper parameters? How does this decision be instructive going forward?
Right. And so we're going to spend probably towards the end of the show, so stay tuned. We're going to spend a little bit more time on the Catholic Charities case, and there was another case too, Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
But what I'm doing is kind of building to some other things. So
sorry.
We're going no. I think that's great. So another case that is moving right now is Moyle versus United States. And this one, it stems from Idaho's abortion ban conflicting with the Federal Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, which is EMTALA, right? So some people have heard that. So the question that was asked of the court was, can doctors who are religiously opposed to abortion be forced to perform them in emergencies? So that one is actually on the docket to be heard by the Supreme Court.
Has that already been briefed and taken to oral argument?
I think it's in process right now. Okay. So we need what we'll do is we're going to put that on our docket to talk about more.
So that might be for the next sitting next year's sitting.
Right. That's what I'm believing. Okay. Unfortunately, I didn't note where that is in the process.
You know, I don't recall learning about that briefing and or oral argument.
Well, see, that's why even on Jim Hochberg used to like live and breathe this stuff, so he was always watching.
Yeah.
But I think right now that there are things happening on the Supreme Court level that we're not really knowing about because the media is not talking about it.
Yeah, you gotta plug in yourself.
So stay tuned. We're going to talk about that. Okay, another key case before we move into the one we really want to talk about is Murthy versus Missouri. And this is a case that involves allegations that federal agencies pressured social media platforms to suppress speech, including faith-based views on vaccines, gender, morality. So the question that they're addressing is this indirect government censorship?
I'm somewhat familiar with that particular case because I know that one of the plaintiffs was the Health and Human Services Secretary Robert Kennedy. I believe his organization, or he himself, may have been put off or put out from social media because of government's interference and government's directive, actually. So I'm glad that case is going through, and they're going to be hopefully some fact finding and review by a trial court to uncover what really went on there. I think it's horrible. It's scary that our government would be in the business of suppressing free speech.
Absolutely. And I think what's important is for people to know that whatever happens on the Supreme Court level, it ultimately could affect how we do business right here in the state of Hawaii.
That's why it's called the Supreme Court. The 9 justices there, lifetime appointments, untouchable, can make decisions that will affect your life, my life, everyone's life.
Absolutely.
Stay tuned. Be careful.
Yep.
Be watchful. Excuse me.
That's right. Okay, so in these last maybe 12 minutes or so, let's jump into the Medina versus Planned Parenthood. And so I want to give a little bit of overview on that one, right? Okay, so this started in 2018. The South Carolina governor, Henry McMaster, he issues an executive order to exclude abortion providers from the state's Medicaid program, directly impacting Planned Parenthood's clinics. Of course, Planned Parenthood then files a lawsuit, right? They don't like it. There was a district court ruling, right? And the ruling, it favored Planned Parenthood, stating that the state's action violated the Medicaid Act's free choice of provider provision. Then it was appealed to the Fourth Circuit, right? And the Fourth Circuit, it affirmed the district court's decision, agreeing that Medicaid beneficiaries can enforce the free choice of provider provision under the federal civil rights laws. Then in December of 2024, the U.S. Supreme Court grants how do you say that?
Certiorari.
Certiorari review.
Yeah.
Okay. And then on April 2nd, they actually heard the oral arguments on this particular case. We're expecting a decision in June, but I know you have some notes on the case itself.
Yeah, I think it's a very important case, and it's going to have a potential to really affect the funding and decisions of the states, all 50 of them, on how they go and use their Medicaid dollars. Given the cuts going on with the federal government right now and anticipated further cuts, it's going to really be important for states to have some effect and control on where they expend Medicaid dollars. It's a joint program primarily geared to help those of low income or without insurance, elderly. It's a great program. Hawaii benefits tremendously from a Medicaid program for our population. It's very important. But the case here is whether or not a state can decide whether a particular healthcare provider, like a Planned Parenthood, is appropriately set up to provide these services when the state itself has a policy against supporting paying for abortion services. So I think that's one of the issues here. There's also the issue of whether or not a beneficiary of the Social Security Medicaid provisions, plaintiff in this case, has the right to bring a lawsuit in court against the state for depriving her of her free choice to see her doctor, her care provider at Planned Parenthood. So actually, there's several issues going on at the same time. But I think it's an important issue. It's a relevant issue, and it deals with, to some degree, language. What was the legislative intent, Congress's intent when they approved this law to give the person a right? Now, I use the word right in air quotes because it gives them a benefit to select their provider of choice, qualified by the state. So there's several elements going down. It's going to be interesting to see whether the Supreme Court is going to support Planned Parenthood or it's going to go with South Carolina supporting the state's decision.
So now how is this going to affect Hawaii? If the Supreme Court rules against the lower courts, then how's that going to affect Hawaii?
I don't know if it's going to affect Hawaii so much in that Hawaii probably does use some of its Medicaid dollars.
Definitely does.
To support a healthcare provider like Planned Parenthood. And I call them a healthcare provider because that's what they're coming forward as in this case. They provide more than just abortive services.
And please do not send any nasty emails to Marcus. Marcus is aware of Planned Parenthood and what they do. And he's just using the term healthcare provider because that's what they say.
Yeah, that's what they're saying. But they provide more than just, abortive services, contraceptive services. They provide gynecological examinations.
Well, they claim to provide.
Well, that's what they're saying. I think that's part of the record. They say they do that, cancer checking, blood pressure. I don't know whatever else they do there. But they also provide services to affirm transgender youth. We know that.
Yes.
That's another line of services they provide. So it's very relevant for this state, and it could affect our state.
Okay, so that's another case that we've got to stay plugged into. All right, so now let's move
But we do know in the budget, the governor has asked for additional monies, perhaps to fill any gap or void or lack of funds based upon this decision and or the federal actions after this decision.
So you have every right to send an email to the governor or call his office and tell him that you don't believe that any taxpayer funding should go to Planned Parenthood. You have a right to do that, to raise your voice. As always, we always encourage you to do it with a spirit of love and aloha, but be firm that you don't want your taxpayer dollars funding Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, I think we talked about this very issue in the budget.
We did.
Last shows ago.
Last show. Yep. And so that's why it's important, right? And that's why we do this, because they all tie in, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's move to another case. This one is called Catholic Charities Bureau, Inc. versus Wisconsin Labor and Industry Review Commission. And this one stems from 2016 now, going back several years. Catholic Charities Bureau and its subsidiaries sought exemption from Wisconsin's unemployment insurance program, claiming that they were operated primarily for religious purposes, which they are, right? We're talking Catholic Charities. March 14th of 2024, the Wisconsin Supreme Court rules 4-3 that Catholic Charities did not qualify for the religious exemption, stating that while the organization's motivations were religious, its activities were secular. Then in August of 2024, Catholic Charities files a petition for writ of certiorari with the U.S. Supreme Court, seeking to challenge the Wisconsin Supreme Court's decision. December 2024, the U.S. Supreme Court, they grants the certiorari. And January 2025, Catholic Charities submits its merits brief. February 2025, Wisconsin Labor and Industry Review Commission files its response brief. March 31st, they hear oral arguments, and we're expecting this decision also in June of 2025.
Yes. Yeah, I think this is a easier case to understand because, so let's start with unemployment insurance. Unemployment insurance is a joint federal state program. It's intended to provide some relief for those employees who are laid off, fired, lose their job. Unemployment insurance kicks in to provide them some income to get them through this hard time, this patch. And it requires that certain employers provide periodically some payments per the number of employees to the unemployment insurance fund. It's a very important fund. If you guys remember the 2020 COVID catastrophe, when everything was shut down, hotels were shut down, travel agencies were shut down, businesses were shut down, restaurants were shuttered by the directives of the administrations. It caused great pain and suffering. But fortunately, unemployment insurance was there to backstop it and provide necessary aid and assistance. So it's an important program. But historically and pursuant to common known application of the federal law, it exempts religious organizations, religious institutions, churches, related not-for-profits. And I think in this case, Catholic Charities is close enough to the Catholic or Christian faith and its practices to deserve this unemployment insurance exemption. The state obviously disagrees. They think, no, they're operating a service of housing or food service or for home care or senior services care, like any other secular not-for-profits. Therefore, they should pay up and participate in the unemployment insurance program. That's what I think happened in the lower court. But if you listen to the Supreme Court ruling, you can hear from even the most liberal judges ask these probing questions of, do you want the state to come into an organization like Catholic Charities and measure and determine what is religious services, what is religious-based services? Isn't that an overextension of government into religion?
Yeah, that to me is that whole thing of the government intrusion in religious.
No, exactly, yeah. and that's the whole thing about government
separation of church and state.
Well, no, it's not really. It's more than that. I say it's basically fundamental of discouraging or encouraging a particular religion, and I think that's where most of the justices are coming from. We're not talking about a religion like Christianity or Buddhism or Muslims. We're talking about even sects, denominations. Are they going to get into that? Who's deserving of unemployment insurance? So I think the court is geared to say no. If you give this to religious organizations and whatever you call them, they provide services akin to part and parcel of their religious order, we're going to allow them the exemption. And I think that's where it's going to go. I think it's going to be a strong ruling, maybe a unanimous ruling.
That's what I'm thinking.
Maybe an 8-1 ruling with the newest Supreme Court Justice Jackson, dissenting, which is also good too. Yeah. Dissenting is fine. But
we talked about Eeyore in the last show.
That's right.
Right? You always got to have that Eeyore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you to put on your thinking cap on how you think these cases. Yeah. Look in the tea. On the bottom of the tea. Do you think that these are going to be in favor or be ruled in favor of religious freedom?
I think the latter one definitely will. I think that's an easier one. The other one, I can't really say. You can't really say. That's a tougher one there.
Well, we will be back. Marcus and I will be back to discuss the ruling in June when they come out. And we'll even have Jim Hochberg call in and give his 2 thoughts because I know he still will be watching.
Hear Jim.
Just to bring him back, because
when he and I disagree, we have good fun, right?
I love it. I love it. Okay, well, we appreciate you spending time with us today. Make sure you stay tuned because we've got some special guests lined up that unless you stay and watch the show, you're not going to know who they are. So stay plugged in and make sure you like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you know every time we upload a new video. Comment, and we will see all of you next week.